Okay, good day everyone. So in this video demonstration, we're gonna have a quick review with functions. So this review session will comprise of the different topics that we've already covered, including what is a function, how do we create a function, and how do we manipulate or how do we use the different functionalities of a function. So a function is basically, you can think of it as a mini program within our program. So it's an independent block designed to help us make our program easier to maintain. So there's something that we call as modular programming. So it's a programming paradigm where you divide your program into manageable chunks or manageable functions. Functions are also known as modules, that's what we have learned from the previous learning guides. So let's start. So in this video demonstration, I'm gonna be simply printing the sum of two numbers. Alright, so let's have an import here. I'm just gonna create a basic program. I'm gonna call IOStream. And have my main here. So inside my main function, I'm just gonna create here two variables. So I'm gonna call the first variable as num1 and the second variable as num2. Then I'm gonna have here a print statement. I'm just gonna see out, enter num1. Then I'm gonna store the value of num1 to num1 variable. I'm gonna do the same for num2, so I'm just gonna copy and paste these lines right here, change this to num2. Alright, so next I'm gonna add here another variable called sum, and I'm simply gonna put the value of num1 plus num2. Now let's have here a print statement to see if we were able to calculate the sum of two numbers correctly. Okay, so I'm just gonna write here sum is, and then the value of sum. Alright, so we have not yet created any function aside from main. So main here is a function that we have defined, but this main function is actually required by our program. So this is what the program or the compiler is going to look for once we run a program. So it is very important for us to have this main function. So you cannot redefine or you cannot change its name, otherwise your compiler is going to say, okay, no target. So it wasn't able to find the main function. So very important. So we're gonna leave this one as main. So if I run this program, it should display, okay, let's say num1 is 5, num2 is 7, sum is 12. So that's how you create a simple program. So let's try to create a basic function. So I want to create a function. I want to transfer this, all these lines here, into a separate function. So I'm just gonna cut this here, and then I'm going to create a function that I'm gonna call addition. So I'm just gonna add some comment right here, addition function. So parts of a function, so we have the first is something we call as the return data type. So what we have learned so far about the return data type is that it will be the type of the value that we will be returning to our function call. Alright, so in this particular example, we don't need to return any value, so we can use the keyword void. Next, we're gonna be needing to define the name of our function. So you can call this function any name. So I'm simply gonna call this as add function. And then we have here our parameters. So this parenthesis right here, okay, will contain something we call as the parameter list, or the list of the different variables that we will be using inside the function. But in this demonstration, we don't need any parameters since we won't be sending any arguments. Alright, so I'm gonna paste the code right here. Alright, so we have now created function addition, and we've added different statements inside this function. Now, say for example, I ran this program, and let's take a look at what happens. Let's take a look at the errors. Alright, so as you can see, it's not printing anything. It's not displaying anything, although we have already declared the add function right here. Now, why is that? The reason it's not giving us anything is because, okay, again, no, these two are independent blocks. So void add is independent from our main function. So meaning main function does not know that add here exists, not until we invoke it. So we can invoke it, or we can execute the statements right here by calling the function. So we can call the function by simply writing the name of the function, then adding the arguments list should we have any. In this case, we don't have any arguments list. Alright, but now let's see if this one will work. Okay, so in here, I'm calling the add function. So let's see if this one will work, or if this one will give us an error. Alright, so as you can see here, it's giving us an error. So on line 7, it says error and was not declared in this scope. Now what does that mean? So it says that and here was not declared in this scope. So as what we have learned based on our previous discussion, since functions are independent, okay, they don't know that the other functions or other variables within the other functions exist, not unless we declare them, or not unless we specify them as either a global variable or creating a prototype. So what happens is that compiler is reading each line by line. So after reading the main function here, it will proceed with line 7. Now the compiler reads add, and then it tries to link this add function with the previously read lines. But since we have not yet, or since the compiler have not yet read this add functions right here, it will not know that it exists. So not unless if we put it right above it. Okay? So if we put it above, it should be able to, okay, read the add function. Or another way to solve that problem would be to create something that we call as prototype. So a prototype is simply sort of like similar with a function call, but includes the data type. So this whole block right here, or whole statement right here, then let's just add the separator. It should now be able to, okay, read the add function. So again, you can either put your function above the main function, or you can add this prototype right here. So let's try to run the program again. I'm just gonna add here values 9 and 10. Alright, sum is 19. So we now know that the program is running correctly. Now let's talk about the scope of the variable. So again, the scope depends on where you declare them. So if the variable is declared within this addition function, like we have here sum will only be usable within this function. So if I try to do a print statement right here, so say for example, I'm gonna see out sum. So notice that it's giving me sum was not declared in this scope. So that's because, okay, main function does not know that sum exists. Only this add function does. So what we can do, so say for example, if you really want or if you really need to have this sum function here readable by other functions, like for example, there are plenty, or you have other functions that needs to read the sum and you don't want it to be an argument. So you can simply create a global variable. So a global variable is just like declaring any variable, except that we declare it above the main function or simply outside the other function. So here I'm going to call int sum. So I'm going to try to run this program. Okay, say for example 8 and then 8, sum is 16 and then print again 16. So that's because of this cout function. So it's now able to read the value of sum, although they were not declared within the functions. So again, if you want to make a variable usable within or across different functions, you can simply declare it as a global variable. All right, so now let's proceed with creating a function that will be able to return a value. So again, as what we have said earlier, this void right here, this void keyword signifies that addition will not be returning any value. But what if you want to return a particular value? So say for example, you want to return the value of sum. So I'm just going to delete this global scope right here. And I'm going to replace this addition with the integer. So integer will be the return type of the or the data type of the value that we will be returning. So in this case, I want to return the value of integer sum. And I will not be printing any values here. Instead, I want to print the values or the value in my main function. All right. But the question is, where will it return the value of sum? Okay, the value of sum will be returned to the function call in this one. So add and then this open and close parenthesis is actually equivalent with whatever this sum variable holds or will hold. So say for example, I'm gonna create a cout statement, and then I'm gonna be putting here the function call for the add function. So if I try to run this program, let me just close this one. So I'm gonna build and run this program. So enter number 6, 7, 13. So it's able to print 13 by simply outputting this add function. So you can do you can store the return type to another variable. So for example, I have here int x is equal to a add and let's print x. So it should do the same. You can also perform other operation with this one. So let's say for example, I'm simply gonna add for demonstration. I'm gonna add this return. So I'm simply gonna do you build and run here. So let's say, for example, first number is 5, second number is 10. So what it's gonna do is it's going to take the sum of 5 and 10, and then it's going to call it again, and then do an addition, print x, so it should return 30. So in here, notice that I'm calling add function twice. So meaning these statements should also be displayed twice. So I'm gonna do a build and run. The first number is 5, second number is 10. Okay, another set. So I'm gonna say 4 and 4. So 23. Right, so what it did is that it called this add function twice, and then it performed an addition to the return value of sum. You can have as many function calls as you want, and you can call the function anywhere within your function. You can even call a function call within another user-defined function. All right, so now let's talk about passing values to a function. So let's say, for example, you don't want your add function to do any input or output. So you simply want it to perform the needed or necessary operations. Say, for example, you want it to simply compute the value of sum and then return its result. Say, for example, I'm going to add another function. So I'm going to call this function as get values. Okay, and then it will not have any return value or data type. Call this as get val, and then I will not take any argument, or it will not have any parameter. I'm simply gonna put this 2 right here. So I'm gonna ask the user to enter num1 and num2. So next, I want to call this addition function. All right, so this addition function right here will receive the value of num1 and num2. So for that to work, you simply need to create something that we call as the parameters list. Okay, so here I'm gonna write int num1 and int num2. The value of num1 and num2 will be in the arguments list, which is inside our function call. So here I'm gonna call addition, and I'm gonna add my arguments list for the values that we are going to pass into the function. So a value can either be the exact value or a reference to that value. When you say exact value, we're simply say here I'm gonna put 5 and 7. So this is an example of pass by value. So we're simply sending the exact value that we want or we need to our function. So this particular statement right here or function call right here will simply send value 5 and 7 to our addition function. Okay, 5 will be stored in num1 and 7 will be stored in num2. Now, as what we have learned from the previous learning guides, the number of arguments must match the number of parameters, not unless if the value of num2 has a default value. But in this case, no default value is set, so the number of parameters and arguments must be the same. All right, so but in most cases now, we won't be sending the actual value. We will be sending rather a reference. So a reference refers to the variable or the container that holds the actual value. So in here, the value that we want to send to our addition function is actually within this num1 and num2 variable. So I'm simply gonna write here num1 okay, and also num2. All right, and then I'm gonna do a simple cout to display the output. And in here, I'm simply gonna call one function. Which function will I be calling? Will I be calling the add function or the getVal function? Okay, if you guessed getVal, you're correct. So we simply need to call this getVal function here. Okay, why do we not need, why is there not a need to call, or why not call this add function right here? Since this add function is already called within this getVal function. So if I try to run this program, since the add function is already called within our getVal function. Now, since the functions are declared after the main, we simply need to create a prototype for this. So I'm simply gonna copy and paste the first line of our function here. Then add a separator. And then notice now that we've made some changes in our addition function. So this should also be reflected. The changes here, or the parameters, should also be reflected here in our prototype. All right, so let's try to run this program. Okay, enter num1, 5, enter num2, 7. Okay, and then it displays 12. All right, so that's how we can create our function. Again, remember